Jessica Monroe was the epitome of perfection, a stunning blonde with a smile that could light up any room. At 28, she seemed to have it all: a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a successful career as a fashion designer. Her husband, Thomas Monroe, a 45-year-old real estate mogul, adored her. Their lavish lifestyle in the upscale suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, was a testament to their success and happiness. To outsiders, they were the perfect couple, the kind that inspired envy and admiration, but beneath the surface, things were far from perfect. Jessica, despite her outward contentment, was restless. The glamour and wealth that once captivated her now felt suffocating. Thomas was often away on business, leaving Jessica alone in their grand house with nothing but her thoughts and a glass of wine for company. The loneliness slowly crept in, gnawing at her, and she found herself craving excitement, something that could make her feel alive again. One evening, after yet another argument with Thomas over his constant absences, Jessica decided to escape the confines of her home. She drove downtown and ended up at a cozy, dimly lit bar called The Hideaway. It was a place she had never visited before, but something about its unpretentious charm drew her in. As she sat at the bar, nursing a cocktail, she noticed the bartender, a tall, handsome man with a rugged look and piercing green eyes. His name was Ryan Pierce, a 32-year-old who had been tending bars for years, but his real passion was writing. He was charming, quick-witted, and knew how to make his customers feel special. Jessica was no exception. Their eyes met, and Ryan flashed her a smile that sent a thrill down her spine. It had been a long time since she felt this kind of excitement. They struck up a conversation, and for the first time in months, Jessica felt truly alive. Ryan was everything Thomas wasn't: spontaneous, adventurous, and attentive. He listened to her without judgment, and the more they talked, the more she felt an undeniable pull towards him. What started as a harmless conversation turned into a flirtation that neither of them could ignore. Over the next few weeks, Jessica found herself returning to the Hideaway almost every evening. It was their little secret, a place where she could forget about her troubles and just be herself. The attraction between them grew stronger, and one night, after a few too many drinks, they gave in to their desires. What began as a chance encounter quickly escalated into a full-blown affair, one filled with passion and secrecy. Jessica and Ryan were reckless, meeting at his small apartment above the bar or in discreet motels far away from prying eyes. They both knew the risks, but the thrill of the forbidden was too intoxicating to resist. For Jessica, it wasn't just about the physical connection. Ryan made her feel seen and desired in a way that Thomas never did, but the affair was more than just an escape for Jessica. It became an obsession. She started neglecting her work, missing important meetings, and spending less time with her friends. Even Thomas noticed the change in her, though he attributed it to the stress of her job. He had no idea his wife was living a double life, caught in a web of lies and deceit. Ryan, too, was becoming increasingly entangled in this dangerous game. He knew Jessica was married and that getting involved with her was a mistake, but he couldn't bring himself to end it. He was falling for her, and the thought of losing her was unbearable. They were playing with fire, and it was only a matter of time before someone got burned. Then, one fateful night, everything changed. Jessica was at Ryan's apartment when her phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. He was coming home early from a business trip and wanted to take her out for a surprise dinner. Panic set in as she realized she had left her car parked outside Ryan's building, a place Thomas would surely recognize. She rushed out, heart pounding, and barely managed to leave without being seen. But as she drove home, an unsettling thought crept into her mind. What if Thomas found out? What if he knew everything? The fear of losing her comfortable life, of being exposed as a cheater, was overwhelming. She loved Ryan, but she wasn't ready to give up everything for him. She made a decision that night, one that would set off a chain of events no one could have anticipated. Jessica told Ryan they needed to end things, that it was too dangerous. Ryan was devastated but agreed, understanding the risk they were taking. But deep down, he was determined to fight for her, no matter the cost. They didn't know it then, but this would be the beginning of a dark, twisted journey that would lead to betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately, murder. The weeks following Jessica's decision to end the affair were tense. intense. Ryan was relentless, sending her messages and trying to convince her to meet. She ignored him, focusing on repairing her marriage with Thomas. But the guilt gnawed at her, and the constant fear of Ryan exposing their secret kept her on edge. Then, one evening, everything came crashing down. Thomas returned home unusually early, his face pale and tense. He tossed his phone on the table, his eyes filled with betrayal. "Care to explain this, Jessica?" he demanded, his voice shaking with anger. Jessica's heart stopped as she glanced at the phone screen. It was a photo of her and Ryan, locked in a passionate embrace outside the hideaway. The message was from an unknown number, and there was no doubt who had sent it. Panic surged through her as she tried to think of a lie, but the look on Thomas's face told her it was useless. He knew everything. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered, but the words sounded hollow even to her. "Not what it looks like?" Thomas shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "You're cheating on me, Jessica, with a bartender. How long has this been going on?" Tears filled her eyes as she tried to reach out to him, but he pulled away, his face twisted with disgust. "I thought you loved me, Jessica. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." Thomas stormed out of the house, leaving Jessica sobbing on the floor. Her perfect life was unraveling, and it was all her fault. She knew she had to talk to Ryan, to make him understand that he needed to leave her alone. But deep down, she was terrified of what he might do next. Desperate and broken, she drove to the hideaway. Ryan was waiting for her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. As she walked in, he smiled, but it faded as he saw the look on her face. "Thomas knows, Ryan," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's seen the photos. He knows everything." Ryan's expression darkened. "I had to, Jessica. You're slipping away from me, and I can't lose you. We belong together." "No, Ryan." Jessica's voice rose, filled with panic and frustration. "You don't understand. He'll destroy me. He'll take everything. I need you to stop this." Ryan grabbed her arm, his grip tight. "We can be together, Jessica. Just leave him. We can start over." But Jessica shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I can't. Please, Ryan, just stay away from me." She pulled away and ran out of the bar, leaving Ryan standing there, his face a mask of confusion and rage. As she drove home, she knew she had made a terrible mistake, but it was too late now. She had to face the consequences of her actions. A few nights later, Jessica woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing. It was a message from Ryan. Her hands shook as she opened it, dread filling her heart. "Meet me tonight. We need to talk. I'm not going to lose you." She knew she shouldn't go, but something compelled her. Maybe it was the guilt, or maybe it was the fear of what he might do if she didn't show up. She told Thomas she was going to visit a friend and left the house, her heart pounding in her chest. She drove to Ryan's apartment, and he was waiting for her outside, his face lit up by the dim streetlights. He looked different, more intense, almost unhinged. As she stepped out of the car, he rushed to her, grabbing her by the shoulders. "We can't go on like this, Jessica. I can't stand the thought of you with him," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "I've done something that will make everything better." Jessica's blood ran cold. "What do you mean? What have you done, Ryan?" He smiled, but it wasn't the charming, carefree smile she had fallen for. It was dark, twisted. "Don't worry, Jessica. I'll take care of everything. He won't hurt you anymore. We can be together now." She realized with a jolt of horror what he was implying. "Ryan, no, you can't. Please, don't do this." But Ryan's grip tightened, and she saw the determination in his eyes. He was going to kill Thomas. Panic surged through her as she pushed him away, scrambling back to her car. "Stay away from me, Ryan. Don't come near me again." She drove off, her mind racing with fear. She had to warn Thomas, but what would she say? That her lover was planning to kill him? How could she even begin to explain that? As she reached the house, her phone rang. It was Thomas. Relief washed over her as she answered, her voice shaking. "Thomas, are you okay?" His voice was cold, detached. "Jessica, we need to talk. I'm at the office. Come now." She hung up, her heart racing. Something was wrong. She sped to his office, praying she wasn't too late. When she arrived, the building was dark and empty. She rushed inside, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She found Thomas in his office, sitting at his desk, his face pale and drawn. "Thomas, thank God you're okay," she cried, rushing to him. "You have to listen to me. Ryan is." But before she could finish, Thomas held up his hand. "Stop. I know, Jessica." He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a gun, pointing it at her. "I know everything." Jessica froze, her heart pounding in her ears. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. "Thomas, please, put the gun down. Let's talk." But Thomas shook his head, his eyes filled with pain and fury. "You ruined everything, Jessica. I loved you, and you betrayed me." He stood up, his hand shaking as he aimed the gun at her. "I don't see a way out of this." In a flash, Jessica lunged forward, knocking the gun from his hand. They struggled, and the gun went off, the sound deafening in the small room. Thomas staggered back, his eyes wide with shock as he looked down at the blood spreading across his shirt. Jessica screamed, her hands trembling as she watched him fall to the floor. His eyes glazing over, she fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. It was over. Everything was over. Jessica sat on the floor, paralyzed with shock, as Thomas's lifeless body lay beside her. The metallic scent of blood filled the room, and her mind raced, trying to process what had just happened. She didn't mean for this to happen. It was supposed to be a warning, not an ending. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her phone with trembling hands. She had to call someone, anyone, but who? Then, a thought struck her like a bolt of lightning. Ryan. She dialed his number, her fingers shaking so badly she almost dropped the phone. "Jessica?" His voice was eager, hopeful. "Ryan, I didn't mean to. Thomas is dead." "He's dead," she sobbed, her words barely coherent. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end before Ryan spoke, his voice calm and determined. "Listen to me, Jessica. Don't panic. I'll be right there. We'll figure this out together." She hung up, her mind numb. Everything felt surreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Within minutes, Ryan burst into the office, his face pale but composed. He took in the scene, the blood, Thomas's body, Jessica's tear-streaked face, and without missing a beat, he pulled her to her feet. "We have to get out of here. Now," he said urgently, guiding her out of the office. "No, Ryan, I can't leave him like this," Jessica whimpered, her eyes never leaving Thomas's body. "Jessica, listen to me. If we stay, they'll blame you for this. We need to leave, and we need to do it now." His voice was firm, and she knew he was right. They had to go. They fled the office, the reality of what they were doing not fully sinking in until they were speeding down the highway. Ryan's mind was racing. This was not how he had planned it, but now that Thomas was dead, they had to cover their tracks. He glanced over at Jessica, who was trembling uncontrollably. "Jessica, listen carefully. We have to get our story straight. We'll say you came home and found him like that. We were never there, okay?" Jessica nodded numbly, but her thoughts were in turmoil. She wasn't sure if she could lie about this, but Ryan's grip on her arm was steady, reassuring. When they reached Ryan's apartment, he pulled her inside and sat her down. He wiped her tears and tried to calm her down. "We'll be okay, Jessica. We just need to stay calm and stick to the plan." But before they could say another word, there was a loud banging on the door. Ryan's heart sank as he looked through the peephole to see two police officers standing outside. They had been quick, too quick. Ryan opened the door, trying to remain calm. "Officers, can I help you?" "Ryan Pierce, we need to speak to you and Jessica Monroe," one of the officers said sternly, his hand hovering over his holster. Jessica's breath caught in her throat as the officers entered the apartment. She knew it was over. They were caught. "What's this about?" Ryan asked, his voice barely masking his panic. The officers exchanged a glance before one of them spoke. "We have reason to believe you both were involved in the murder of Thomas Monroe." Jessica felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "No, it was an accident. I swear," she cried, but the officers weren't listening. "Ma'am, we'll discuss this at the station," one of them said as they handcuffed her. Ryan's mind was spinning. How had they been found out so quickly? Then it hit him. Thomas must have called the police before she arrived, telling them to come if something happened. It was a trap, and they had walked right into it. As they were led out in handcuffs, the flashing lights of police cars illuminated the dark street. Reporters were already swarming, cameras flashing as they were shoved into separate patrol cars. Back at the station, Jessica broke down, confessing everything. She told them about the affair, the confrontation, and the struggle that ended in Thomas's death. But Ryan stayed silent, his mind working furiously. He knew they had no hard evidence linking him to the murder. All he had to do was keep his mouth shut. In the end, Jessica was charged with manslaughter, her tearful confession sealing her fate. Ryan, despite his involvement, was only charged as an accessory after the fact. He was sentenced to a few years in prison, but Jessica was the one who bore the brunt of the punishment. As the trial ended and the gavel fell, Jessica realized that she had lost everything: her husband, her lover, her freedom. And for what? A moment of passion that had spiraled out of control. The news channels buzzed with the story for weeks, how the affair of a lonely wife and a desperate bartender led to the brutal death of a wealthy man. The public ate it up, fascinated by the tragic, twisted tale of love, betrayal, and murder. And as Jessica sat alone in her prison cell, she knew one thing for certain: she had made the worst mistake of her life.